My name is Dorothy Hale. I am 70 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a seamstress. My hands once carried the weight of fabric, needles, and thread, shaping clothes that carried people through their weddings, their jobs, their children's graduations. I never thought those same hands would tremble as I turned the brass key to the front door of the summer house I built with every ounce of my savings. It was supposed to be my refuge, a modest place by the water, valued at $300,000, but to me, it was priceless. I wanted to rest there for a weekend, to breathe in the smell of pine and lake air. Instead, when I pushed the door open, I was met with the sound of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. The living room lights were blazing. Balloons and half-eaten platters crowded the dining table. My son-in-law, Victor, stood in the center wearing my late husband's old robe. Yes, the one I had carefully folded away in a cedar chest. He raised his glass and, seeing me in the doorway, his face twisted into something cruel. "Why is that old leech here? This house is ours now," he shouted. The words slammed against me harder than any storm I had ever weathered. Patricia, his mother, smirked at me as though she had been waiting for this performance. Monica, his sister, clapped her hands and laughed as though it were a show put on for her amusement. Even children ran around on the rugs I had bought decades earlier, their sticky fingers leaving stains on the upholstery. My daughter Emily stood frozen behind Victor. She avoided my eyes, her silence cutting deeper than any insult. For a moment, the air left my lungs. That house was not just timber and plaster. It was stitched from years of sacrifice. I had patched clothes by candlelight, refused new shoes for myself, and saved every dime to create this sanctuary. And now, to them, I was nothing but an intruder. But instead of shouting, instead of breaking, I smiled faintly. My voice came out low and steady. "It's okay," I said. Inside, my heart was breaking into sharp little shards, but I knew something they didn't. I knew that quiet does not mean powerless. They returned to their celebration, raising glasses as if to toast my defeat. Yet, as I stepped aside, I thought to myself, this moment, humiliating as it is, will not be the end of me. If you have ever been dismissed, told you were useless, or forced into silence when you knew the truth, then perhaps you'll want to stay with me. Because what happened after that night, what I chose to do, made Victor and his family regret every word they ever spat at me. So, let me tell you what happened, and why my story is one you won't forget. Would you like to hear it? When I stood there in the doorway, I thought perhaps I had misunderstood what Victor had shouted. But the smirk on his face and the way Patricia leaned into her chair told me there was no mistake. This was no slip of the tongue. He meant every word. He wanted me gone. Before I could even take another step into my own house, Victor spread his arms wide, blocking the hallway as though he were the rightful master. He wore my husband's robe, the fabric dragging along the floor, sleeves too long for him, yet he paraded in it like a crown. His voice filled every corner of the room, dripping with contempt. "Didn't you hear me? You don't belong here anymore. Go back to whatever little hole you crawled from behind him." Patricia chuckled. She leaned forward on the arm of the sofa with the authority of a queen presiding over a play. "It's embarrassing, Dorothy. You should be resting in some senior facility, not haunting young people with your presence. Don't you understand you've had your time?" The words hit me harder than I cared to admit. Patricia had never liked me. From the very first day I met her, she looked at me as though I were beneath her son, beneath her family, beneath everything. But tonight she spoke with more venom than ever, her voice echoing for everyone to hear. Emily was there too, my daughter, my only child. She stood slightly behind Victor, her shoulders tight, her hands clasped together as if she were holding herself still. Her eyes darted toward me once, quickly, and then dropped to the floor. The silence of her gaze was like a dagger. She did not defend me, not even with a word. Then Monica stepped forward, swinging her long hair over her shoulder, a smirk dancing on her lips. "I don't see what's so complicated," she said with a laugh. "Dorothy, you've had this house forever. What do you need it for? You're too old to enjoy it anyway. Let us put it to good use. We'll actually know how to have fun here." She gestured to the people around the room. Victor's friends with their loud voices and clinking bottles, already spilling drinks on the wooden floor I had polished with my own hands. I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream at them for what they were doing, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I looked at Victor. His eyes glittered with satisfaction, like a cat cornering a mouse. He stepped closer until I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You're not welcome," he said. "This is our house now. Go." My feet felt rooted to the floorboards, but I forced myself to move. I tried to step past him, to enter, to claim even a small part of what was mine. He blocked me, spreading his body wide across the frame of the hallway, his voice rising louder and louder so every guest could hear. "This is my property now. My family's property. You think you can just walk in here because you paid for it once upon a time? That's over. Times change. People move on." Laughter burst from the corners of the room. Someone clapped. Another whistled. I had never felt so small in a place that once made me feel proud. I looked down at my hands, these hands that had stitched dresses for other women's children, these hands that had scrubbed floors and counted pennies to make the dream of this house possible. Now they trembled, powerless, as if all the years of work were being erased by a man who had done nothing to deserve it. Emily shifted, her lips parting slightly as though she might say something. My heart jumped, waiting for her voice, waiting for her to remind him whose house this truly was. But the words never came. She looked at me with eyes heavy with shame, then turned away, aligning herself with her husband instead of her mother. The silence cut me deeper than all of Victor's shouting. Patricia stood and placed her hand on Victor's shoulder. "Don't waste more words," she said. "She understands. She knows when she's not wanted. Look at her. She has no strength left to fight. Just let her go. We'll handle things from here." Monica laughed again. "Maybe she can find a nice little retirement room with bingo nights and soup suppers. That's where she belongs. Not here with us." Her words dripped with cruelty, designed to draw blood. I forced my lips to curve into a faint smile, though my chest ached. My voice came out steady, but it felt as though the weight of the world pressed down on me. "I hear you," I whispered, though no one bothered to stop and listen. They returned to their glasses, their laughter, their celebration of what they believed was their triumph. And I stepped back out into the night air, the cold wind brushing against my cheeks like a reminder of how far I had fallen. Inside, the lights glowed bright, voices rose louder, and I could still hear Victor's declaration ringing in my ears. "This house is ours now." I walked down the steps, my heart pounding with humiliation, but my feet steady. I told myself silently that this was not the end of the story. Not for me, not for the house I had built with my own two hands. I had been treated like an intruder in my own home, cast aside by the people who should have been my family. But even in that moment of crushing shame, a small spark inside me refused to go out. When I returned the next morning, I told myself I only wanted to gather a few things: my sewing box, the quilt I made with Emily when she was a girl, and the photograph of my late husband that had rested on the mantel for 20 years. I knew I had to face them again, but I thought if I moved quietly, perhaps I could collect what mattered and slip away before the sting of their laughter reached me. Instead, the moment I opened the door, my stomach dropped. My house no longer looked like mine. It looked like a carnival ground left behind after a storm. Plates and cups littered the floor, sticky with dried wine. Pizza boxes and crumpled paper towels were piled on the piano bench I had polished with lemon oil every spring. The smell of beer and fried food hung heavy in the air, a stranger's smell, and it suffocated me. I walked into the living room, hoping at least to find some corner untouched. But my eyes caught on the trash bags bulging near the fireplace. My heart clenched as I stepped closer. Inside the black plastic, I saw the familiar colors of my life. The handmade curtains that once fluttered by the window had been torn down, stuffed in with greasy paper plates. A stack of letters tied with ribbon, the ones my husband wrote to me during our first years of marriage, was bent and crushed, as though they were nothing more than old newspapers. I knelt, pulling them from the bag, brushing crumbs from the ink. My hands shook as though I were holding the last pieces of him. From down the hallway, I heard Patricia's voice, sharp and clear. "Oh, leave that junk, Dorothy. We thought you'd be relieved to have less clutter." That's what old folks always say, isn't it? They want things simplified. She walked into the room, holding a mug of coffee like she was mistress of the house. Her eyes flicked to the letters in my hand, and she smiled without warmth. "You should thank us. We're doing what you never had the courage to do, clearing out the past." Before I could respond, Monica appeared, dragging one of my old armchairs across the floor, scraping the wood I had cared for all those years. She dropped it with a thud and said, "This thing's ancient. We're taking it out back later. Maybe burn it for fun." Her laughter rang out, thin and cruel. I tried to breathe, to remind myself that no amount of cruelty could erase the truth that this house was mine. But then I looked toward the bedrooms, and the sight stopped me cold. The door to my room was wide open. 2 children lay sprawled on my bed, juice boxes balanced on their stomachs, crumbs scattered across the quilt I had sewn by hand. My chest tightened. That quilt had taken me a year to make. Each stitch was made in quiet nights, each square chosen carefully, representing moments of my life. And now it was nothing but a picnic blanket to them. One of the children, Victor's son, my grandson, looked up at me with wide eyes. His voice was light, innocent, yet it sliced through me. "Grandma, why don't you live in a nursing home like other grandmas? Isn't that where old people go?" He tilted his head, curious, not knowing the weight of his words. His question silenced the room more than Victor's shouting had done the night before. I froze, clutching the letters to my chest. Patricia smirked behind him, as if pleased the boy had said what she didn't have to. I wanted to answer him gently, to tell him I still had strength, that I still had worth. But the words caught. I could not humiliate him for asking, for he was only a child repeating what he heard at home. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, "Not all grandmothers need to live in nursing homes." My voice trembled. I wasn't sure if he understood, or if he even cared. for he turned back to his juice box and the cartoons playing on a tablet propped against my pillow. Victor entered then, his steps heavy, his presence commanding the room. He looked around at the mess without shame. "See how lively it feels now?" he said, stretching his arms as though to display the ruin. Before, this place felt like a museum. Quiet, dusty, boring. Now it has life, energy, real family energy. He glanced at me, his grin sharp. "You should be grateful. We're giving this house a new purpose." My mouth opened, but no sound came. I turned slowly, letting my eyes take in what had become of my sanctuary. The rugs were stained. The mantel was bare. The air smelled of strangers. And everywhere I looked, something precious was gone or broken. My husband's pipe stand was missing. The porcelain figurine I bought on my first anniversary was shattered in a trash bag. The silence that once felt peaceful in this house had been replaced with noise, the kind that doesn't warm a place, but invades it. Patricia crossed her arms, standing beside Victor. "You see, Dorothy, you've held on too long. You didn't notice how the world moved past you. Let go. It's time to step aside." My heart screamed to argue, to tell them I was still here, still strong, still capable, but my lips only pressed together. I thought of all the nights I had sat by that fireplace sewing clothes to pay for Emily's school. I thought of my husband's hands as he laid the final brick on the porch steps. I thought of Emily, laughing as a girl, running down the hallway that was now filled with other people's voices, and the pain was almost unbearable. I stood quietly, clutching the bundle of letters, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Monica whisper, "See? She knows it's over." Their laughter swelled again, following me out like a chorus. As I stepped into the daylight, my eyes burned. I pressed the letters tighter to my chest, vowing silently that I would not let them erase me, not from my home, not from my life. I did not know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. They had gone too far, and in time, they would come to understand the cost of pushing me aside. As I left the house behind me, clutching those letters like fragile lifelines, my mind drifted backward, uninvited. Memories surfaced, thick and vivid, as though the walls themselves were whispering their history. I could almost see myself 25 years younger, standing on that very patch of land with Emily still small enough to hold my hand. It had been a raw lot back then, nothing but dirt, weeds, and the echo of possibility. My husband had been gone barely a year, and every night the silence of widowhood pressed down like a heavy quilt. I could have given up. I could have let the world swallow me in grief. But instead, I pulled out my sewing machine, took every extra job I could, and began saving for this dream. Each dollar tucked into an envelope felt like defiance, a whisper to myself that I was not finished yet. Customers came and went, bringing torn hems, ripped sleeves, wedding gowns that needed delicate adjustments. I sewed until my fingers blistered, until my eyesight blurred. I told Emily, still so young, that every stitch was a brick in the home we would one day build. She would giggle at my words, tracing patterns in the fabric scraps that littered the floor. I used to press a kiss to her forehead and say, "One day, sweetheart, you'll run barefoot across our porch, and you'll know every piece of it came from us." When I had saved enough, I met with an architect. He was a kind man with salt and pepper hair who listened more than he spoke. I told him I wanted something simple, strong, nothing too grand. I wanted sunlight to pour into the kitchen where I could bake bread on Sunday mornings. I wanted a wide porch where Emily could sit and read on warm evenings. I wanted a small sewing nook with a window facing the lake where I could work and look out at the water shimmering. He smiled and sketched quickly, his pencil bringing to life the lines I had carried in my heart for years. The day construction began, Emily and I stood at the edge of the property, watching men pour concrete and raise beams. Her small hand squeezed mine so tightly. "This will be ours?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. I nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, darling. Ours." Each week we came back to watch the progress. The frame rose like a skeleton against the sky, then walls enclosed it, then a roof. Emily danced in the sawdust, pretending the unfinished rooms were castles. I remember the smell of fresh wood, the echo of hammers, the thrill of knowing my sacrifices were taking shape in the world. When the house was finished, it was more than just shelter. It was proof. Proof that I had survived the loss of my husband. Proof that I could stand on my own feet. Proof that hard work could create beauty out of grief. The first night we slept there, Emily curled beside me, the sound of crickets humming outside the window. She whispered, "Mama, it feels like Daddy's still here somehow." And I held her close, feeling the truth in her words. This house was not just lumber and nails. It was love stitched into every corner. Years passed, and the house became the stage of our lives. I remember baking Emily's birthday cakes in the kitchen, her laughter ringing through the hallways. I remember her graduations, her first heartbreak, the nights she sat on the porch telling me her secrets while the stars blinked above us. Every room held a memory. The sewing nook became my sanctuary, where I created dresses for brides and uniforms for school children, the sound of the machine humming like a heartbeat. Even when times were hard, the house gave me strength. During the winters when money was thin, I sold quilts to pay the heating bill, but the walls kept us warm. When Emily moved away to college, I walked through the quiet halls, each echo reminding me of the girl who once chased dust motes in the sunlight. When she married Victor, I gave her the master bedroom for their honeymoon week, the air filled with flowers and music. I told myself this house would always be a refuge for her, a place where she could come home no matter what storms she faced in life. Now, standing outside after the humiliation of the last days, those memories pressed against me like an ache. The sight of Victor strutting around in my husband's robe was not just disrespectful, it was theft of everything that house represented. To them, it was just property, a prize to snatch and devour. To me, it was a story written in wood and stone, a history of survival and devotion. They could throw my curtains in trash bags and spill wine on the rugs, but they could never erase what had been lived within those walls. I thought of my husband again, his laugh, the way he would come home smelling of soap and sawdust. He had dreamed of building us a place like this before death stole him from me. Though he never saw the finished house, I always believed his spirit lingered in the creak of the stairs, in the way the sun touched the windows each morning. That belief had carried me through lonely years. And seeing strangers trample on it now, seeing my own daughter stand silent as though none of it mattered, tore something deep inside me. I walked farther down the road, away from the noise that spilled through the windows. My eyes blurred with tears, but in those tears, a fierce resolve began to form. They thought I was powerless, an old woman who had no voice left. But they did not know the years of sacrifice, the strength it took to build what I had built. They did not know that every board, every nail, every quilt square was a promise I had kept to myself. And I would not let that promise be broken. Not now, not ever. As I sat in the small rented room that night, the letters from my husband still clutched in my lap, my mind refused to rest. The humiliation replayed again and again, but it was no longer just the sting of insult that kept me awake. It was the dawning awareness that Victor's words, his boldness, his certainty, had not come from nowhere. This had not been a sudden fit of arrogance. He had been laying the foundation for this takeover long before I walked through that door. I began to recall the comments he had made over the years, small remarks I had brushed aside at the time. At family dinners, he would lean back in his chair and say things like, "What does an old woman need with a house by the lake? Shouldn't you be thinking about a retirement home instead?" His tone was always light, presented as a joke, but his eyes never carried humor. They carried calculation. I remember once when I mentioned how the house was nearly paid off, he smirked and muttered, "Perfect timing." Emily and I could manage it better anyway. Back then, I laughed softly, believing he was simply puffing himself up, trying to sound important in front of his friends. But now, sitting there in silence, I realized those comments were breadcrumbs he had been scattering all along. Victor had never seen me as someone with the right to hold on to what I had built. He saw me as an obstacle standing in the way of what he believed was his due. One memory in particular gnawed at me. Months earlier, Emily had come by with a stack of papers. She said they were routine forms for managing household expenses, and that Victor thought it would make things easier if she could help keep track of bills. I had skimmed them without much thought, trusting my daughter, though my chest tightened when I saw my name listed beside hers. She reassured me with a quick smile, saying it was just a precaution, that she and Victor only wanted to take the load off my shoulders. Against my better judgment, I signed. At the time, I thought it harmless, a small step to make Emily's life easier. But now the memory made me cold. I rose from the bed and paced the room, the creaky floorboards groaning under my feet. The realization was sinking deeper, turning my humiliation into something sharper. Victor had been waiting for me to stumble, to seem frail, to give him the excuse he needed. That robe he wore, the way Patricia claimed I had no strength left, it was all part of a narrative they had been rehearsing behind closed doors. I thought of Emily's silence when he declared the house his. Her lips pressed shut, her eyes lowered. Was it fear? Was it shame? Or was it that she too had been worn down by his persuasion? My heart ached at the possibility. Victor was clever in his cruelty, never openly raising his voice at her in front of me. But I had seen enough in the set of her shoulders and the tightness in her smile to know he controlled her. And now, with the weight of debt from his failed business ventures pressing on them, he must have convinced her that my house was their salvation. I remembered overhearing him once in the kitchen, speaking to Patricia in a low voice. "Once it's in Emily's name, everything will be fine. She can't argue if it's for the family." Patricia had nodded, her lips curling into satisfaction. I had pretended not to hear, convincing myself I misunderstood. But I hadn't. They had been planning this long before I caught them in the act. I sank back into the chair and pressed my hands to my temples. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together in a way that made me nauseous. The mocking laughter, the trash bags filled with my belongings, even the innocent question from my grandson. It all served Victor's goal of painting me as someone out of place, someone whose time had passed. If I resisted, they would call me senile. If I stayed quiet, they would push me out completely. Either way, I was cornered unless I found a way to fight. I closed my eyes and thought of my husband again. He had always told me to trust my instincts, that I was sharper than I gave myself credit for. His voice came to me as though carried on the wind through the cracks of that rented room. Don't let them steal what you've built. Don't let them turn you into a ghost while you're still alive. I straightened my back, clutching his letters tighter. Victor had underestimated me. He thought humiliation would weaken me. That age would slow me down. That silence meant surrender. But he had miscalculated. Every insult, every cruel smirk, every memory of what I had sacrificed for that house was now fuel. They had lit a fire, and though it burned me, it also illuminated the path forward. The realization was painful, but it was also clarifying. This wasn't just about property. It was about my dignity, my history, my right to exist without being erased. And if Victor thought I would quietly fade away, he was about to learn that even a seamstress who had spent her life in the background could fight with every thread of strength she had left. That night, for the first time since the humiliation began, I felt something steadier than grief. I felt the iron resolve of a woman who had been tested before and had survived. Victor's plan was clever, but he had not planned for me to resist. And I would resist. I would gather every piece of evidence, every scrap of truth, and I would hold it up to the light. The game he thought he had already won had only just begun. I woke up the next morning in the hotel room I had rented with money I barely wanted to spend. The wallpaper was peeling, the mattress sagged in the middle, and the thin curtains let in more noise than I could bear. I had never been the kind of woman to run away from my own home, yet here I was, an exile in my own life. For a few long minutes, I sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, staring at the cracked mirror across from me. My reflection was a stranger. Shoulders slumped, hair limp from the damp air, lines etched deep into my face. I thought of Victor's voice declaring I didn't belong, of Patricia sneering that my time had passed, of Monica laughing as though I were nothing more than an obstacle in her way. The words echoed so loudly that I pressed my palms against my ears as though I could shut them out. But something inside me refused to bend completely. I told myself, Dorothy, you've survived worse than this. And it was true. I had survived the loss of my husband, the long nights when the rent threatened to crush us, the endless hours at the sewing machine when I thought my body would give out. I had survived being left alone in a world that barely noticed me. Each time, I stitched myself back together, quiet but unbroken. Why should this be different? I stood and opened the window. The morning air was sharp and clean, smelling faintly of rain. I let it wash over me. I thought about the house again, the ruin they had made of it, and the memory of my grandson's question stabbed me fresh. Grandma, why don't you live in a nursing home like other grandmas? He had spoken with such innocence, not realizing he had repeated the poison of his elders. But those words struck a nerve I could not ignore. They wanted me invisible, packed away, erased. That was the real intention behind Victor's arrogance, Patricia's cruelty, Monica's laughter, and Emily's silence. And suddenly, the humiliation hardened into something else, into a vow. I pulled the small suitcase onto the bed and began unpacking. Instead of treating this as temporary hiding, I laid out my belongings as though preparing for a campaign. My sewing box, my husband's letters, the envelope of bank records I had carried with me just in case. I spread them on the desk and looked at them not as sentimental objects, but as reminders of my strength. They had taken my house, but they had not taken my mind, my memory, or my ability to fight. I sat down with a notebook and began to write. I wrote down every remark Victor had ever made about the house, every time Patricia suggested I should step aside, every uneasy glance Emily had given me when handing me papers I hadn't read closely enough. I traced the line of manipulation that had led here. Each word steadied me. Each memory recorded was one more thread woven into a fabric of resistance. By late afternoon, the room no longer felt like a cell. It felt like a workshop. The dull light of the lamp illuminated my notes, and the shadows on the wall reminded me of evenings long ago when I worked late into the night, patching dresses for women who could not afford new ones. Back then, each stitch meant survival. Now, each line I wrote meant preparation. I whispered to myself, "They think I'm weak because I smiled and walked away. They think silence means surrender, but they don't know me." The more I said it, the more real it became. I thought again of my daughter. Emily had been my pride, my partner, my joy. I had raised her to believe in kindness, in hard work, in loyalty. Yet when Victor raised his voice, she had lowered hers. When Patricia mocked me, she had not defended me. Her silence was the sharpest betrayal. Still, I could not erase the image of her as a child, laughing in the sawdust of the unfinished house. That memory gave me both pain and fuel. If she could not speak for me, then I would speak for myself. The hotel room grew quiet. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the old woman sitting at a cheap desk, vowing to reclaim her dignity. But in that silence, I felt something stir. I felt the first ember of defiance flicker into flame. I pressed my hand against the table, steadying myself, and thought of the words my husband once told me. "When people push you into a corner, Dorothy, you either break or you rise. And I know you. You rise." I lifted the envelope of bank statements. The numbers weren't much compared to the value of the house, but they were enough to remind me that I was not destitute. I had means, I had allies, and I had memory. Victor had built his scheme on arrogance and assumption, but I had built my life on patience and persistence. I knew which foundation would last longer. That night, I lay on the sagging mattress, but I did not feel crushed. For the first time since walking into my ruined home, I felt something close to clarity. They had humiliated me, yes. They had stripped me of pride, yes. But in trying to erase me, they had made one grave mistake. They had reminded me exactly who I was. I closed my eyes and let a small smile touch my lips. Tomorrow would not be about retreat. Tomorrow would be about the first step back toward my house, back toward justice, back toward the dignity they had tried to bury. They thought I would fade quietly into the background. They were wrong. The following evening, when the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the lake, I returned to the summer house. I told myself it was only to see the place from the outside, to remind myself that it still stood, still belonged to me despite the laughter that had echoed through its walls. But as I reached the porch, the sound of voices inside was quieter than before. Most of the guests had gone. Only a faint murmur carried through the windows, mixed with the faint hum of a television. Something inside me pulled forward, urging me not to walk away this time. My pulse quickened as I turned the handle on the back door, the one that creaked slightly when opened. To my relief, they had left it unlocked. I slipped in as quietly as I could, the scent of spilled beer and smoke still heavy in the air. The living room was littered with bottles and crumpled napkins. but I ignored the mess. My eyes went immediately to the side table where Victor had been leaning the night before. Papers had been scattered there, some in folders, others loose. My breath caught. He was careless, arrogant enough to leave evidence in plain sight. I stepped closer, my fingers trembling as I reached for the pile. The first thing I saw was a stack of forms stamped with an official seal. At the top of one page were the words, "Petition for Guardianship." My stomach turned. I read further, the words swimming before my eyes. Victor had filed documents claiming that I was no longer of sound mind, that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. His petition asked that Emily, my daughter, be granted guardianship. And of course, tucked in parentheses beneath her name, it stated that her husband would assist in financial matters. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My own daughter's name on a document designed to strip me of control over my life. I scanned through the details. Victor had written that I was forgetful, that I left bills unpaid, that I had misplaced important documents. Lies. All of it. I paid every bill on time. I balanced my checkbook every month. I kept records so meticulous that even the bank clerks had once joked I should work there myself. To see these lies in black and white was like being struck in the chest. I forced myself to keep reading. The petition requested not only guardianship, but also the transfer of property management to Emily, which in practice meant Victor. My summer house, my savings, everything I had worked for would be under his control if a judge believed this paperwork. He had even attached what looked like a doctor's note, though the signature was smudged and unfamiliar. I had not visited a doctor in months, yet here was a statement claiming I was disoriented, prone to confusion, and unfit to live alone. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The humiliation of being shouted at in my own living room was nothing compared to this. This was not just insult. This was erasure. He had planned to make me legally invisible, to take the house and every dollar I had under the guise of protection. My knees weakened, and I sank into the chair beside the table. The papers shook in my hands, rustling loudly in the silence of the room. I thought of Emily again, her silence when he shouted, her downcast eyes, the quick way she had once slid those household forms in front of me. Was this what she had been too afraid to admit? Did she know exactly what he was doing, or had he tricked her too? My heart longed to believe she was innocent, but the weight of her name on those papers made it hard to ignore. I folded the petition carefully and tucked it into my handbag. If Victor had the audacity to lie about my mind, then I would use his arrogance against him. The law could be cruel, but it could also be a shield if you held the truth. And the truth was still mine. I would not let him reduce me to a helpless signature on a form. As I rose to leave, I heard footsteps down the hallway. My breath caught, and I pressed myself against the wall. Victor's voice carried through the air, low but sharp. He was speaking on the phone. "Once the guardianship goes through, everything is ours. She won't fight. She doesn't have the strength. Just keep Emily steady. She'll do what I say." His laugh followed, smug and confident. My hands curled into fists. I slipped out the back door as quietly as I had entered, the cool night air rushing over me. The papers in my bag felt heavier than stone, but they were also a weapon. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had something real, something that proved what Victor had been plotting. My humiliation had a name now, stamped and dated with legal ink, and that meant I had a path forward. As I walked back to the hotel, my steps grew steadier. The shame that had weighed on me the past days began to harden into resolve. They thought they could bury me beneath lies, but I had lived too long, fought too hard, to let ink and arrogance erase me. The fight was no longer about saving a house. It was about saving myself. The next morning, I asked Emily to meet me alone. I called her cell phone, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. She hesitated at first, saying Victor had plans, that she was busy, but I insisted. There was a pause on the line, a silence. That told me she already knew what this was about. Finally, she agreed to meet at a small cafe near the school where she worked. I arrived early, choosing a booth in the back. I wanted the privacy, the distance from curious eyes. I ordered a cup of tea I barely touched, my mind racing with the words I needed to say. When Emily walked in, she looked tired, older than her 40 years. She slid into the booth across from me, avoiding my eyes. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then I reached into my bag and laid the folded guardianship petition on the table. Her shoulders stiffened, her lips parted, but no words came. I watched her face closely, hoping for shock, for outrage, for denial. Instead, her cheeks flushed with something that looked like shame. "Emily," I said softly, "explain this to me. Explain how your name ended up here." She reached for the paper, but stopped halfway, pulling her hand back as though it might burn her. She shook her head and finally whispered, "I didn't want you to see it like this." "Then how should I have seen it?" I pressed. "Should I have waited until the court stamped its approval and I no longer had a say in my own life?" "Is that what Victor told you?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "It's not what you think, Mama. We're drowning. Victor's business has been failing for years. He's tried everything, but the debts keep piling up. The creditors are circling us. He said if we could secure the guardianship, if the house transferred to me, it would give us breathing room. We could refinance, maybe sell it if necessary. It was supposed to save us." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands together tightly. I stared at her, unable to believe the words I was hearing. "Save you?" I said slowly. "By destroying me? By declaring me incompetent and stealing the home your father and I built with our bare hands?" She flinched, but she did not deny it. I didn't know what else to do. Victor. He's under so much pressure. He said this was the only way. I told myself it was temporary, that once things settled, we could fix it. I shook my head, my throat tightening. Temporary? Emily, once those papers go through, nothing is temporary. Do you understand? I become a shadow in my own life. Every decision, every dollar, every place I can live will be controlled by you and your husband. Do you see what that means? Her eyes filled again, and this time a tear slid down her cheek. I know it's wrong. But I felt trapped. He talks to me like there's no other option. He says if I don't go along with it, the whole family will fall apart. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe it would hurt less. Her confession pierced me deeper than the petition itself. My daughter, the girl I had raised with such hope, had been worn down to silence by a man's desperation. I wanted to reach across the table and hold her hand, but I couldn't. Not yet. Emily, I said, silence is not protection. It's consent. Every time you stay quiet, you hand him another piece of me. Do you understand what you've done? She lowered her head, tears dripping onto her lap. I was scared, Mama. I thought maybe you wouldn't fight, that you'd let it happen quietly. I didn't want to see you shamed in court. I didn't want to face it. I leaned forward, my voice sharp but trembling. I have faced worse than courtrooms, Emily. I have faced the grave. I have faced nights alone with nothing but thread to keep food on the table. Do not tell me I cannot face this. The shame is not mine. It belongs to Victor and to anyone who helps him. She sobbed quietly, shoulders shaking, and I let the silence stretch. For the first time, I saw clearly how much of her had been swallowed by his control. She was still my daughter, but she was also a woman tethered to a man who drained her spirit. The cafe around us buzzed with the sound of dishes clattering and people laughing, but it felt far away. In that booth, it was only us, mother and daughter, bound by love and torn by betrayal. Finally, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" I folded the petition again and slid it back into my bag. "What I must," I said simply. "I will not vanish because he demands it. I will not surrender what I have built. And you, Emily, you must decide which side you stand on. Your silence has already wounded me, but it will not break me. I need you to see that before it's too late." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes, but she gave me no promise. Her silence lingered, heavy and uncertain. I rose from the booth, placed $1 on the table for the tea I had not touched, and looked at her one last time. "I love you," I said quietly, "but love is not enough if it is silent." I walked out of the cafe into the bright morning light. My steps were unsteady, but my purpose had never been clearer. Victor believed he could trap me with lies, and Emily believed her silence would shield her from the storm. They were both wrong. I was not done yet. When I confronted Victor directly, I chose a time when I knew the entire family would be present. I wanted no whispered denials, no excuses carried back and forth between doors. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I walked to my house with the petition papers secured in my bag. The driveway was crowded with cars, voices drifting out through the open windows. I paused at the porch, feeling the weight of every memory pressing down on me, then pushed the door open. The laughter inside faltered for a moment as they saw me, but Victor recovered quickly, rising from the armchair as though he were king of the castle. "Well, well, look who came back," he said with a grin. "I thought we made it clear this isn't your place anymore." I held my ground in the entryway, my eyes steady on his. "You made it clear you wanted me gone." "That doesn't make it true," Patricia scoffed from the sofa, her coffee mug resting in her lap. "Dorothy, you embarrass yourself. Why drag this out? You should be resting somewhere safe, not stumbling into gatherings where you're not wanted." I ignored her and reached into my bag. With deliberate calm, I pulled out the folded petition and laid it on the coffee table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood silenced the room. Victor's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You've been busy," I said. "Telling courts I've lost my mind. Claiming I can't handle my own affairs, forging doctor's notes. Was that your idea alone, or did you make my daughter write her name on it to share the blame?" Emily sat in the corner, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look up, her face pale. Monica, however, leaned forward eagerly, her smile wide. "So what if he did? Maybe it's for the best. You should thank him for looking out for you." My voice rose sharper than I intended. "Looking out for me? By turning me into a ward of my own child? By stripping me of the home I built stitch by stitch, brick by brick?" I turned back to Victor. "You've taken arrogance to a new height. And you've miscalculated." Victor walked toward me slowly, his posture loose, but his eyes hard. "You think anyone will believe you over me? You're an old woman with shaky hands and no one left to back you up. Courts don't care about sob stories, Dorothy. They care about evidence. And I've got plenty. You've got lies," I said evenly. "And lies are fragile things when the truth is placed beside them." His jaw tightened, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the fear in his eyes. But Patricia quickly filled the silence. "Dorothy, don't be dramatic. You know Emily signed those forms because she cares. We all care. We want to make sure you're taken care of. Isn't that what every family wants?" I looked at Emily then, and my voice softened, though my anger did not fade. "Is that why you stayed silent? Because you thought this was care?" Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she still said nothing. Victor laughed suddenly, the sound harsh. "See? She knows I'm right. She knows you're not fit to keep going like this. Why don't you do us all a favor and stop fighting? Sign the papers, and we'll make this easier." I stepped closer to him, close enough to smell the bitterness of whiskey on his breath. "No," I said firmly. "You will not erase me. You will not take what does not belong to you. And if you think your forged documents and your threats will hold up, you're a fool." His expression twisted, but before he could respond, a new voice entered the room. From the doorway, a man in a dark suit walked in, carrying a briefcase. He was not expected by them, but I had arranged for his visit. John Mercer, an attorney with years of experience, stepped calmly into the room. "Afternoon," he said, his tone professional yet cold. "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Hale. I understand there are documents circulating that suggest she is incompetent. I would like to see those." Victor's face drained of color, though he quickly masked it with bluster. "Who the hell are you? You can't just barge in here." Mercer placed his briefcase on the table beside the petition. "I can, and I did. Because I've already contacted the clerk's office, and I know exactly what you've filed. Fraud, forgery, coercion, none of it will stand." He turned his gaze directly to Victor. "You've exposed yourself more than you realize." Patricia sputtered. "This is outrageous. Dorothy doesn't know what she's doing, and now she's dragging strangers into family matters." Mercer's eyes were steady. "This is no longer just a family matter. It's criminal. And if you push this further, you will not just lose the house you're trying to steal, you will face charges." The room fell into uneasy silence. Monica muttered something under her breath and retreated toward the kitchen. Emily sat motionless, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Victor stood rigid, fury etched into every line of his face. But I felt, for the first time in days, the ground firm beneath my feet. I was no longer alone. I lifted my chin, looking at Victor without fear. "You wanted me weak. You wanted me gone. But I am still here, and I will fight you with every breath I have left." Victor slammed his fist on the table, rattling the cups and scattering a few of the loose papers. "You'll regret this," he spat. But his voice cracked slightly, betraying the confidence he tried to project. Mercer calmly gathered the petition and tucked it into his briefcase. "I'll be in touch soon," he said. Then he turned to me and nodded. "You've done the right thing, Mrs. Hale. We'll make sure of it." As we walked out together, I felt the heat of their stares burning into my back. But I also felt a steadiness I had not known since the moment Victor first shouted me out of my own home. They thought they had silenced me. They thought age had made me fragile. But I was not fragile. I was sharpened, honed by every hardship I had ever endured, and I was ready for the fight ahead. The day after Mercer's visit, I knew I needed more than just his legal guidance. I needed proof that I was not the fragile, confused woman Victor wanted the world to believe I was. Evidence could not only expose his lies, but also remind me that my life was still intact, that I had order where he claimed I had chaos. So I made my way downtown to the bank, a place I had not visited in months. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and ink, the way it always had, and behind the counter stood a familiar figure I had known for decades. Dorothy? Samuel Brooks looked up from his paperwork, his lined face breaking into a smile. He was 2 years older than me, retired once, but drawn back into part-time work at the bank to keep himself occupied. Well, I'll be. It's been too long I felt something unclench inside me at the sight of him. Samuel was not just a banker, he was an old friend, one of the few left from the years when my husband was alive. We had shared dinners once, our families gathering around the same table, laughter echoing through the house. Time and loss had thinned those gatherings, but his loyalty had never faded. "I need your help, Sam," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I don't just mean advice. I need you as a witness." He frowned slightly, motioning me to a quieter desk in the corner. "Tell me what's happened." I laid out the story, each piece of humiliation, each detail of Victor's plan, the petition with Emily's name attached, the forgery of the doctor's note. Samuel listened without interruption, his brow furrowed deeper with every word. When I finished, his hands were clasped tightly, the knuckles white. "That man," he said finally, his voice low. I knew he had pride, but I didn't realize he had rot in his bones. "And Emily," he shook his head but stopped himself. "You don't have to explain further." "What do you need from me?" "I need proof," I answered. "Proof that I am competent, that I have managed my own affairs, that I am not the helpless figure they want to paint. I've kept my savings here, my records. I know you can show the court I've balanced everything properly, and I need you to stand with me when the time comes." Samuel nodded without hesitation. "Dorothy, you've always been sharper than most people half your age. If Victor thinks he can claim otherwise, he's about to get a surprise. Come with me." He led me to the office where client records were kept. Together we reviewed my account, every deposit, every withdrawal, each careful notation I had made. The numbers told a story, one I had nearly forgotten. Over the years, I had saved more than I realized, little by little, until the balance had reached $118,000. I stared at the figure, blinking back tears. For so long I had told myself I was scraping by. But here was proof that all those sacrifices had accumulated into something solid. "Sam," I whispered, "I didn't know it was this much." He smiled softly. "You've always been careful. This isn't luck, it's discipline. And now it might just save you." He tapped the folder gently. "We'll make copies, notarize them, and when the time comes, I'll testify. No one can say you've been incapable of managing your life when the numbers are this precise." A warmth spread through me that no humiliation could extinguish. For days I had felt cornered, powerless. Now, holding those records, I felt something shift. These papers were not just numbers. They were the quiet testament of my resilience, the ledger of every night I stayed up sewing to pay bills, every time I skipped new shoes so Emily could have her school supplies. They were proof that I had not wasted my life, that I had built stability from scraps. I looked at Samuel then, and my voice caught in my throat. "You've given me back more than numbers. You've given me ground to stand on." He reached across the desk and patted my hand. Dorothy, you've stood on your own ground all along. You just forgot to look down. We sat in silence for a moment, two old friends surrounded by the hum of the bank, the sound of pens scratching and drawers sliding open and shut. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt less alone. There was someone who remembered me not as an obstacle, not as a burden, but as a woman capable and dignified. When I left the bank, the folder of documents pressed against my chest. The sun seemed brighter, the air crisper. People bustled down the sidewalk, unaware of the battle brewing in my life, but I felt taller walking among them. Victor might think he had trapped me, but now I carried proof that undercut every lie he had written into that petition. That evening in my hotel room, I spread the documents on the desk beside my husband's letters. Together, they told the story of my life: love, loss, survival, persistence. I whispered into the quiet, "They will not erase me. Not with forged signatures, not with arrogance, not with lies." And in the stillness, I felt my husband's presence as though he were reminding me that he had always known I would rise when pushed. The fight was not over, but for the first time, I could see how I might win. The following Monday, I kept my appointment with John Mercer. I had chosen him carefully, not only because of his reputation, but because I needed someone who would not look at me and see only age. When I walked into his office, the walls lined with law books and framed degrees, he stood to greet me with a firm handshake. His eyes were sharp, but there was no condescension in them, only focus. I sat across from him at the heavy oak desk and placed the guardianship petition, the forged medical note, and the bank records Samuel had helped me compile. My hands did not tremble as they had before. This time, I was ready. Mercer adjusted his glasses and leafed through the papers slowly, making careful notes on a yellow legal pad. He did not rush, and I appreciated that. When he finished, he leaned back and tapped the pad with his pen. "Mrs. Hale, you are in a stronger position than you think. What your son-in-law has attempted here is not only morally repugnant, but also legally reckless. Guardianship petitions require strong evidence. His lies about unpaid bills are easy to disprove with these bank records. And this medical note," he held it up with 2 fingers, "is clearly fabricated. I will have it examined by a handwriting expert. It won't hold up for a second." His confidence steadied me. "So what do we do?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "We counterattack. We file a response that challenges every claim. We gather affidavits from people who can speak to your competence. Neighbors, friends, Samuel from the bank. Then we move beyond defense. We look at his actions for what they are: fraud, forgery, coercion. These are not small matters. A judge will not look kindly on a man who manipulates his wife into signing away her mother's rights." The word manipulation echoed in the room, and I thought of Emily, her silence at the cafe, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of Victor's control. I swallowed hard. "And Emily?" She signed. "Her name is on the petition. What will happen to her?" Mercer's expression softened. "If she cooperates with us, explains the pressure she was under, the court will likely see her as a victim rather than an accomplice. But if she continues to stand with him, she will be held accountable too." I nodded slowly. The ache in my chest returned, but I pushed it aside. My daughter had made her choices. Now I had to make mine. Mercer continued, his tone crisp. "I also took the liberty of running a background check on Victor Lane. He's been in small claims court twice for unpaid debts. Once, a former employee sued him for back wages. Settled quietly, but the record remains. There's a pattern of dishonesty. It strengthens our case. I felt a small surge of satisfaction. Victor had built his arrogance on the belief that his lies would never catch up with him. Now, piece by piece, the facade was cracking. I want to fight this with everything I have, I told Mercer. Not just for me, but because he cannot be allowed to do this to anyone else. He nodded firmly. Then we will. But you must be prepared. He will not back down easily. Men like him rarely do. He will get angrier, more reckless, and he will try to intimidate you. You must stay calm and let the process work. I met his eyes without flinching. I've lived through worse storms. I won't break now. We spent the next 2 hours drafting my formal response. Mercer asked questions about my daily life, my routines, the way I managed bills and appointments. He wanted to paint a picture of me as I truly was. Capable, meticulous, independent. I answered carefully, offering details about how I kept my checkbook balanced, how I paid utilities on time, how I even volunteered occasionally at the local library. Each fact was another stitch in the fabric of my defense. Before I left, Mercer handed me a folder with copies of everything we had prepared. "Keep this safe," he said. "And remember, you are not alone anymore. Victor may think he's clever, but arrogance blinds men like him. We will use that against him." I walked out of the office into the cool evening air, the folder pressed to my chest. For the first time since Victor had called me an old leech, I felt not only defended, but armed. The fight was no longer one-sided. I had allies, strategy, and truth on my side. That night in my hotel room, I spread the documents out on the bed. My husband's letters lay beside them, a reminder of the man who had believed in me long before any of this began. I traced my fingers over his handwriting and whispered, "I'm fighting, love. I'm fighting with everything you taught me." I thought of Victor's face when Mercer had walked into the room, the way his bluster had faltered for just a second. It would not be the last time his mask slipped. The courtroom would strip him of the power he thought was permanent. As I gathered the papers back into the folder, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was no longer just about defending my home. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Victor had tried to make me invisible, but soon, very soon, he would learn that I was not a woman to be erased. The morning the officers arrived at the summer house, the air was sharp with the smell of pine and lake water. I stood at the end of the gravel drive with Mercer by my side, the official court order tucked neatly into his briefcase. My heart pounded, but not from fear. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath me as mine again. 2 patrol cars pulled up, their blue lights flashing silently, and neighbors began to gather along the roadside. Word had spread quickly. People wanted to see what would happen to the man who had so loudly declared the house his own. Victor appeared on the porch before the officers even reached the steps. He wore my husband's robe again, though it now hung loosely on him, the belt dragging across the wood. His face was flushed, his voice rising before anyone had spoken. "You can't just barge in here. This is private property, my property." He shouted so loudly that Patricia came rushing behind him, clutching her shawl, Monica trailing with her arms folded and her mouth twisted in disdain. Emily stood in the background, pale and silent as ever. One of the officers, calm and steady, stepped forward and handed Victor the papers. "Mr. Lane, You and your guests are hereby ordered to vacate this property immediately. Ownership remains with Mrs. Hale, and any attempt to obstruct this process will result in arrest." Victor's laugh was bitter and loud. "Arrest me? For what? For protecting what's mine." He waved his arms at the house, at the furniture, at the stained rugs and broken mementos. "She's senile. She doesn't even know what year it is. Ask anyone. This house belongs to my wife now, and that means it belongs to me." Mercer stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You've lied long enough. The court has seen through your petition, your forged doctor's note, and your false claims. This is over, Mr. Lane." The murmurs from the crowd swelled. Neighbors who had lived alongside me for decades whispered to each other, pointing at Victor, their eyes filled with judgment. One woman called out, "We've known Dorothy for 30 years. She's sharper than you'll ever be." Another man added, "Shame on you, Victor. Taking advantage of your own mother-in-law." Patricia's face reddened. She tried to shout them down, insisting I was too old to care for myself, but her words were drowned by the crowd's disgust. Monica, usually quick with her laughter, stood frozen, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. Victor's fury grew. He turned to Emily, grabbing her arm. "Say something. Tell them this house is ours. Tell them she can't manage on her own." His voice cracked with desperation. Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes darted to me, wide and glistening. For a heartbeat, I thought she might finally speak the truth. But her silence held, heavy as a stone. Victor cursed under his breath and pushed her aside. The officers moved closer, their presence firm. "You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings and leave," one said. "Do not make this more difficult for yourself." Victor paced back and forth on the porch, his fists clenching, his face contorted. He looked out at the neighbors, at the crowd that had once been indifferent, but was now united in judgment. Their eyes cut into him sharper than any blade. For all his arrogance, Victor thrived on respect, or at least the illusion of it. Now that illusion was being torn apart before everyone he knew. I stood still, my hands folded in front of me, letting the silence of my presence do what words could not. The robe he wore looked pitiful now, not powerful. His performance of ownership crumbled under the weight of reality. Finally, with a growl, he stormed inside. Patricia followed, muttering curses under her breath, and Monica trailed with her eyes downcast. Through the open door, I could hear them throwing clothes into bags, slamming drawers, their fury echoing in the walls that had once held my peace. When they emerged again, their arms loaded with belongings, the crowd fell silent, watching. Victor tried to hold his head high, but his steps were hurried, his face pale beneath the flush of anger. Patricia avoided every eye, her shoulders hunched. Monica carried nothing at all, just followed them down the steps, her usual smirk erased. The officers escorted them to their cars, reminding them that any further interference would have consequences. As they pulled out of the driveway, the crowd erupted in low murmurs again, some shaking their heads, others patting my shoulder. One man said softly, "You deserved better than this, Dorothy." We all knew something was wrong. I nodded in thanks but kept my gaze fixed on the porch. For weeks, that house had been filled with laughter that wasn't mine, voices that weren't welcome. Now, as the door stood open and the sound of their cars faded down the road, the silence returned. It was not the silence of humiliation this time. It was the silence of reclamation. Mercer placed a steady hand on my arm. It's yours again. They can't touch it now. I stepped slowly onto the porch, feeling the wood beneath my feet, as though it were greeting me. The mess inside still waited to be cleaned. The stains still marked the rugs. The curtains were gone. But none of that mattered. The house had endured, and so had I. As I stood there, the neighbors gathered closer, some offering words of support, others simply watching in quiet solidarity. Their presence mattered more than I could say. They had witnessed my humiliation, and now they had witnessed the truth. The shame that Victor had tried to lay on me had turned back on him, exposed under the bright light of day. I looked at them all, my voice steady, though my heart beat quickly. Thank you for standing here with me. Sometimes silence gives power to the wrong people. Today, your voices gave me mine back. They nodded, some with tears in their eyes, and slowly the crowd dispersed. The officers left, the patrol cars rolling away until only Mercer and I remained. He closed his briefcase with a click, his expression resolute. This is only the beginning. The court will finish what started here today, but the tide has turned. I glanced back at the doorway, at the rooms that still smelled of smoke and wine, and felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. They had tried to strip me of dignity, of history, of home. But I was still standing, and the house still stood with me. That evening, after the officers and neighbors had gone and the house was finally quiet, Emily came back. She didn't knock. She stood in the doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes swollen from crying. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, carrying every word we had left unsaid over the years. She finally stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, and when she spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. Mama, I'm sorry. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my hands resting on the wood scarred from years of family meals. I looked at her and felt the familiar ache, the same ache that had lived inside me since the day I saw her stand silent while Victor declared the house his. Sorry doesn't undo what was done, Emily, I said softly. You let them strip me of my dignity. You let them call me useless in my own home, and you stood there without a word. Her lip trembled. She sat across from me, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse. I was scared. Victor. He controls everything, every decision, every dollar. He said if I didn't support him, if I didn't stay quiet, he'd walk away and take our son with him. I thought I was protecting my family. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. When I opened them again, I shook my head. Silence is not protection, Emily. Silence is surrender. Every time you said nothing, you gave him more power. You didn't just fail to protect me, you failed to protect yourself. Her tears spilled freely now. I know. I see it. Watching him today, hearing the neighbors call him out, seeing the police hand him that order. I realized what I've been part of, and I hated myself for it. Mama, please believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out something I had kept for decades, wrapped in a piece of linen. I unfolded it slowly, revealing a delicate dress. The fabric was faded but still strong, the stitching neat and precise. Emily gasped when she saw it. You kept that? I nodded. I made this for your high school graduation. Do you remember? You told me you wanted to look like everyone else, and we didn't have the money to buy the fancy dresses your classmates wore. So I worked every night for weeks, stitching until my fingers ached, just so you could stand proud that day. Emily touched the dress reverently, her tears dripping onto the fabric. I remember. I felt beautiful. You gave me that. I looked at her steadily. I gave you more than a dress, Emily. I gave you strength, a reminder that you didn't need to be like everyone else, that you had worth, no matter what. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that. You let a man's fear and greed drown your voice. And when you stopped speaking, you lost sight of who you are. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to undo what I've allowed. I let out a long breath. Some things can't be undone. You can't erase the silence, and you can't erase the way you turned from me when I needed you most. I can forgive you for being afraid, but forgiveness doesn't erase the damage. You will have to live with what you allowed. Her eyes lifted to mine, filled with pain. Are you saying you can't forgive me? I hesitated, then answered carefully. I'm saying forgiveness isn't magic. It doesn't erase choices. I love you because you're my daughter, but love without truth is just weakness. I won't pretend nothing happened. You stood on the wrong side, Emily, and it broke something between us that may never be whole again. She reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine, but I didn't move. I let her sit there in her grief, knowing that this was a lesson words alone could not teach. She had to feel the weight of her silence. She had to understand what it cost. For a long while, the only sound in the house was her quiet sobbing. I let the stillness settle, because sometimes silence carried more truth than any speech. Finally, I spoke again, my voice calm but firm. You need to find your own strength now, Emily. Not Victor's, not mine. Yours. If you don't, you'll spend your life swallowed by other people's voices. She nodded slowly, wiping her face with trembling hands. I'll try. I don't want to be that woman anymore. I folded the dress back into the linen, smoothing it with careful fingers. Then prove it. Not to me, but to yourself. You owe that much to your son. Her eyes widened at the mention of the boy. He asked me last night why you looked so sad, why you left the house so quickly. I didn't know what to tell him. Tell him the truth, I said simply. Children see more than we think. One day he'll ask harder questions, and when he does, you will need to answer with honesty, not silence. Emily bowed her head, her tears falling again, but this time I did not reach to comfort her. Some lessons must be borne without a cushion. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor. I will fight Victor until the very end. But you must decide if you are still standing in his shadow or if you are ready to step out of it. That choice is yours, not mine. She rose as well, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling. I love you, Mama, she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. I love you too. But love must have courage, Emily. Without courage, it's only a word. She left quietly, the door closing behind her. I stood in the kitchen holding the folded dress, the air heavy with everything we had said and everything we hadn't. My heart ached, but it also felt lighter. For the first time, Emily had heard the truth without me softening it for her. Whether she would rise from it was no longer mine to control. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper, a place where lives were weighed and measured in front of strangers. I sat at the long table beside Mercer, my hands folded neatly, my back straight. I refused to appear fragile. Across the aisle, Victor leaned back in his chair with a smug grin, Patricia at his side, Monica whispering in his ear. Emily sat a row behind them, her eyes downcast, unable to meet mine. The room hummed with anticipation. Neighbors had come, curious onlookers who had witnessed the humiliation at the house, and now wanted to see the end of it. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many lies. He adjusted his glasses and nodded for us to sit. "We are here today to hear the petition concerning the guardianship of Mrs. Dorothy Hale," he said. His voice carried weight, heavy but calm. Victor's lawyer, a man with a slick suit and a voice like oil, rose first. He spoke of my supposed decline, painting me as a frail woman prone to confusion, incapable of handling bills or remembering daily tasks. He gestured at Victor and Emily, claiming they had only wanted to protect me. Each word was polished, rehearsed, dripping with false concern. I sat still, letting him spin his story, knowing my turn would come. When Mercer stood, the air in the courtroom shifted. He began with the bank records, presenting Samuel's affidavit and testimony. Samuel took the stand, his voice firm as he described my meticulous record-keeping, my monthly visits, the way I balanced my accounts down to the penny. The lawyer tried to shake him, suggesting he might be biased because we were friends. Samuel only smiled. "I would be proud to call Dorothy my friend," he said, "but these numbers don't lie. She has managed her affairs better than most people half her age." Next came the forged doctor's note. Mercer produced evidence from a handwriting expert who testified that the signature was not from any licensed physician in the county. The courtroom murmured at that, and I saw Victor's jaw tighten. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Monica crossed her arms, her smirk faltering. Finally, Mercer asked me to take the stand. I walked slowly but steadily, every step deliberate. When I swore to tell the truth, my voice did not waver. Mercer asked me simple questions at first: how I paid my bills, how I kept track of appointments, what I did each day. I answered with clarity, speaking of my sewing projects, my volunteer work at the library, the way I still baked bread on Sundays. The judge listened carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if testing the strength of my words. Then Mercer asked, "Mrs. Hale, can you tell the court what this house means to you?" I took a deep breath. It is not just a house. It is the proof of my life's work. After my husband died, I raised my daughter alone. I sewed clothes by lamplight, saved every dollar, and built that house with my own 2 hands and my determination. Every board, every nail carries the weight of sacrifice and love. To have it stolen from me by lies is not just theft of property. It is theft of dignity, of history, of the right to be seen as the woman I am. Silence filled the courtroom. I could feel eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with admiration. The opposing lawyer rose for cross-examination. He tried to fluster me, asking if I ever forgot where I placed my keys, if I ever felt tired, if I sometimes needed help carrying groceries. I looked him in the eye and answered calmly, "Yes, I sometimes misplace my keys. Yes, I sometimes feel tired. I am 70 years old. But none of that makes me incapable. It makes me." Human laughter rippled softly through the room, quickly hushed by the judge, but I saw the point had landed. Then something unexpected happened. As I stepped down from the stand, my grandson, sitting quietly beside Emily, raised his hand. The judge, surprised, allowed him to speak. The boy's voice was small but carried in the hush. "Dad," he said, turning to Victor, "why did you say lies to take Grandma's house? Why did you tell people she was sick when she isn't?" The room froze. Victor's face drained of color. Patricia gasped, and Monica muttered angrily, trying to shush the child, but the damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom had heard the pure, unfiltered truth from the mouth of a child. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze sharp. "That will be enough," he said, though his expression revealed he had heard exactly what he needed to. Mercer delivered his closing with quiet conviction. This case is not about protecting an old woman. It is about exposing a man who would rather forge papers and manipulate silence than respect the dignity of the woman who gave his wife life. Mrs. Hale is not incompetent. She is resilient, and no court should allow her to be erased. The judge leaned forward, his voice firm. The petition for guardianship is denied. Full rights remain with Mrs. Hale. Furthermore, this court will consider additional proceedings concerning fraud and forgery. He struck his gavel once, the sound echoing like thunder. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I sat down, my body shaking, but my spirit steady. Victor stood frozen, his face twisted with rage, while Patricia whispered furiously in his ear. Monica scowled, her eyes darting toward the door. Emily sat pale and trembling, her son clinging to her hand. I did not look at Victor again. I only stared at the judge, then at Mercer, who nodded to me with quiet pride. The fight was not finished, but the truth had spoken, and the walls Victor had built around his lies were beginning to crumble. When the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, I thought I would feel only triumph. But as the days passed, the victory tasted bittersweet. The house was mine again, legally beyond question, yet the cost of keeping it had left cracks I knew would never quite mend. I returned to the summer house with Mercer's papers in my bag, and the silence inside greeted me like an old friend. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and spilled wine, reminders of what had been done, but it was mine again. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the door frames, the corners where my life had unfolded. For the first time in weeks, I let myself exhale. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. New locks, new keys, and cameras installed above the doors. I wanted no trace of Victor's arrogance left, no chance he could walk in as if he belonged. As the locksmith worked, I sat on the porch and watched the lake shimmer. My neighbors stopped by, some with kind words, others with casseroles and pies. They told me how proud they were, how they had seen me stand strong. I smiled and thanked them, though my heart remained heavy. Support from the community mattered, but it did not erase the fracture in my family. One evening, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar. It was from Emily. My hands shook as I opened it, not knowing if I wanted to hear her words. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had been blinded by fear, that she hoped one day I could forgive her. She said she missed me, that her son asked about me every night, and that she wished she could turn back time. I read every line twice, my chest aching. But when I reached the end, I folded the letter slowly, then tore it down the middle. I could not hold on to words when her silence had cost me so much. Love, I had learned, was not enough without courage. I sat alone that night with the remnants of the letter on the table beside me. I opened my jewelry box, pulling out my wedding band, the gold worn thin, from years of use. Next to it lay the old tin of needles and thread, relics of a life I had stitched together piece by piece. I held them both in my hands, feeling the weight of memory and the strength it represented. These small objects told my story better than any letter. They reminded me that I had built, endured, and survived on my own. I thought of what should become of the house after me. I did not want Victor's family circling it like vultures when I was gone. So I called Mercer and asked him to help me rewrite my will. We sat in his office the next day, and I told him plainly that the summer house would not pass to Emily, nor to her husband, nor even to my grandson. Instead, I wanted it donated to a local charity that provided safe housing for widows. Let the house continue as a sanctuary, not as a prize to be fought over. Mercer nodded, his pen scratching across the paper, his face calm but respectful. When the documents were signed, I felt a strange lightness, as though a weight had lifted from my chest. My home, my sacrifice, my proof of survival. It would serve women like me long after I was gone. That thought comforted me more than anything else could. Nights grew quieter after that. I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the lake catch the moonlight, and I let myself breathe without fear. Sometimes loneliness pressed close, and sometimes I wept for the daughter I had lost, not through death, but through choices. Yet even through the grief, I felt the steady pulse of dignity. They had tried to erase me, but I was still here, living, deciding, leaving my mark on my own terms. One evening, I lit a single candle and placed it on the mantel where my husband's photograph once stood. I whispered to him, as I had many times in the quiet of the night. I did it. I stood my ground. I did not let them take me. I imagined his smile, the warmth of his hand on mine, and I felt at peace. The summer house would never be the same as it had been when Emily was small and laughter filled the rooms. But it did not need to be. It was enough that it stood, and that I stood with it. In the stillness of those evenings, with the house secured and the will rewritten, I found not just victory, but freedom. I had chosen dignity over despair, and that choice was mine alone.